Welcome to Pages from History. Today we're uncovering a civilization so mysterious, so powerful, and so influential that Rome itself would be nothing without them. The Etruscans. This should have been impossible. An entire advanced civilization that dominated Italy for centuries, teaching Rome everything from architecture to religion, from warfare to culture. Yet their story was nearly erased from history. Their language remains largely undeciphered. Their origins are shrouded in mystery. And the shocking truth about who they really were will change everything you thought you knew about the ancient world. Stay with us until the end, because this journey into the past reveals secrets that history tried to bury. First, origins of power. The mysterious arrival and rise of Etruscan civilization. The morning mist rolls across the green hills of central Italy. The year is 900 before the Common Era. In the valleys between the Arno and Tiber rivers, something extraordinary is happening. Small villages are transforming into magnificent cities. Farmers are becoming master craftsmen. Simple huts are giving way to grand stone buildings. A civilization is being born, and nobody knows exactly where it came from. The Etruscans called themselves the Rasenna. Their neighbors called them the Tyrrhenians. The Romans would later call them Tusi or Etrusi, giving us the modern name Tuscany. But names tell us little about origins. Even in ancient times, people argued about where these mysterious people came from. The Greek historian Herodotus claimed they sailed from Lydia in Asia Minor, fleeing famine and seeking new lands. Another ancient writer, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, insisted they were native to Italy, rising from the local population. Modern science has given us DNA evidence, archaeological clues, and linguistic puzzles, yet the question remains hotly debated. What we do know is this. Around the 9th century before the Common Era, distinctive settlements began appearing in the region the Romans would call Etruria. These weren't random villages. They were carefully planned communities with impressive architecture and sophisticated social organization. The people who built them possessed knowledge that seemed to come from nowhere. They understood metalworking at a level that amazed their contemporaries. They created art that rivaled anything in the Mediterranean world. They practiced religious rituals so complex and specific that they must have developed over many generations. The land itself was rich beyond measure. The hills of Etruria held vast deposits of copper, iron, and tin. The soil was fertile, perfect for growing grain and grapes. The forests provided timber for ships and buildings. The rivers connected the interior to the coast, where natural harbors welcomed traders from across the sea. If you were going to build a civilization from scratch, you could hardly choose a better location. The Etruscans recognized this opportunity and seized it with both hands. Their first cities rose on defensible hilltops, overlooking the valleys below. Veii, Tarquinia, Cerveteri, Vulci, Vecalonia. Each became a powerful city-state, independent yet culturally connected. The Etruscans didn't build empires in the traditional sense. They created a confederation of cities, each ruled by its own king or aristocratic council, each competing with the others, yet sharing a common language, religion, and identity. This would be their strength, and eventually, their weakness. The streets of these early Etruscan cities would have astonished any visitor from the primitive villages scattered across Italy. Buildings of squared stone blocks lined carefully planned roads. Temples with painted terracotta decorations dominated the central squares. Workshops produced pottery that combined Greek artistic influence with unique Etruscan style. Bronze workers crafted weapons, armor, and decorative objects that demonstrated technical mastery. Goldsmiths created jewelry so intricate that modern craftsmen struggle to replicate their techniques. But it was underground where the Etruscans truly revealed their sophistication. They were masters of engineering, particularly when it came to managing water. They carved elaborate drainage systems through solid rock, creating tunnels that channeled water away from their cities and fields. These cuniculi, as the Romans would later call them, required precise surveying and incredible labor. Some tunnels stretched for miles, maintaining a perfect gradient to ensure water flowed properly. 2,000 years later, many of these ancient drainage systems still function. The Etruscan economy thrived on trade. Their ships sailed to Greece, North Africa, and the eastern Mediterranean, carrying metals, grain, and manufactured goods. In return, they imported Greek pottery, Egyptian luxuries, and exotic materials from distant lands. Etruscan merchants became wealthy and powerful, their prosperity visible in the elaborate tombs they built for themselves. These weren't simple graves. They were underground palaces, painted with vivid scenes of banquets, dancers, musicians, and athletes. The tombs tell us that Etruscans celebrated life even as they prepared for death. Can you imagine walking into one of these painted tombs? The flickering torchlight reveals walls covered in bright colors that have survived thousands of years underground. Musicians play double flutes and lyres. Dancers move in graceful poses. Servants prepare elaborate feasts. Hunters pursue game through painted forests. Athletes compete in games that honor the dead. Every scene bursts with energy and joy, showing us a people who loved beauty and celebration. These paintings are windows into a lost world, preserving customs and ceremonies that would otherwise be forgotten. The Etruscans organized their society in ways that shocked and impressed other ancient peoples. At the top stood the aristocratic families, wealthy from trade and agriculture. These leucomons, as they were called, ruled the cities and commanded armies. Below them came merchants, craftsmen, and farmers who formed the middle ranks of society. At the bottom were slaves and servants, many captured in warfare or purchased from foreign traders. This hierarchy seems familiar to us, but one aspect of Etruscan society was revolutionary for its time. Etruscan women enjoyed freedoms that would have been unthinkable in Greece or early Rome. They attended banquets alongside men, a practice that scandalized Greek observers who believed respectable women should remain secluded. They owned property in their own names. They appeared in public art and inscriptions, identified by both their own names and their fathers' names. Some evidence suggests they could participate in public life and even hold religious offices. Roman writers, accustomed to strict patriarchal control, found this shocking and used it as evidence of Etruscan moral corruption. But the archaeological evidence tells a different story, one of a society that valued women far more than its neighbors did. Religion permeated every aspect of Etruscan life. They believed the gods communicated through signs that trained priests could interpret. Lightning strikes, the flight of birds, the appearance of animal entrails during sacrifices. All of these carried divine messages for those who knew how to read them. The Etruscans developed an elaborate system of divination, so complex it required years of study. They wrote sacred books detailing the proper interpretation of omens and the correct performance of rituals. These practices would later fascinate the Romans, who eagerly adopted Etruscan religious techniques even as they conquered Etruscan cities. The haruspices, Etruscan priests who specialized in reading animal livers, were particularly famous. They would sacrifice an animal, remove its liver, and examine every detail. Comparing it to bronze models, that mapped the liver's surface into zones associated with different gods. The size, color, and condition of each section revealed divine favor or displeasure. This wasn't superstition in Etruscan eyes. It was science, a systematic method for understanding the will of the gods. Roman generals would employ Etruscan haruspices for centuries, refusing to make major decisions without consulting them. The Etruscan pantheon included gods who would later become familiar in Roman form. Tenia, the sky god who hurled lightning bolts, would become Jupiter. Uni, the queen of the gods, would become Juno. Menra, goddess of wisdom and warfare, would become Minerva. But the Etruscans also worshipped darker, more mysterious deities. Charon, the demon of death with blue skin and a hammer to strike down the dying. Vanth, a female demon with wings who guided souls to the underworld. These figures appear in tomb paintings, reminding the living of the thin barrier between life and death. Death held a special place in Etruscan thought. They believed in an afterlife, but not the gloomy underworld of Greek mythology or the uncertain fate described by early Romans. Etruscan tombs suggest they imagined death as a continuation of life's pleasures. The dead would need their possessions, their favorite objects, their weapons, and jewelry. So the living filled tombs with everything the deceased might require. Elaborate banquets were held at gravesites, with food and wine offered to the dead. Some tombs contained stone couches where the deceased could recline, just as they had at earthly feasts. What happened next in Etruscan history would shape not just Italy, but the entire Western world. The cities grew larger and more powerful. Their influence spread north into the Po Valley and south toward Campania. They established settlements that would become famous cities. Felsina would become Bologna. Mantua would keep its name. Capua in the south became one of the wealthiest cities in Italy. The Etruscans were building something that looked very much like an empire, though they never called it that. But in the hills southeast of Etruria, along the Tiber River, something else was happening. A collection of villages on 7 hills was growing into a town. The people there were learning. They watched the sophisticated Etruscans with fascination and envy. They adopted Etruscan building techniques, Etruscan religious practices, Etruscan alphabet, Etruscan government structures. They even welcomed Etruscan rulers who came to govern their growing town. This settlement was called Rama, and it would remember everything the Etruscans taught it, even as it prepared to destroy its teachers. The Etruscan alphabet, adapted from Greek letters, gave the peoples of Italy their first writing system. Before this, knowledge passed only through memory and speech. With writing came the ability to record laws, keep accounts, preserve religious texts, and communicate across distances. The Etruscans carved their letters on stone, painted them on pottery, scratched them into metal. They wrote from right to left in their early period, later switching to left to right. Their language used these familiar letters to spell words we still cannot fully understand. Inscriptions survive by the thousands, most of them short and formulaic. Names on tombs, dedications on votive offerings, labels on artwork, brief enough to tantalize us, too brief to unlock the language completely. Scholars have worked for centuries to decipher Etruscan. We know some words. We can read names and titles. We understand basic grammar, but long texts remain mysterious. The language doesn't belong to the Indo-European family that includes Latin, Greek, and most European languages. It stands alone, like a single surviving tree from an extinct forest. Every new inscription discovered brings hope that it might be the key to unlock the language completely. So far, That key remains hidden. The Etruscan military was formidable in these early centuries. They fought in the Greek style, with heavily armored infantry forming a phalanx of overlapping shields and thrusting spears. Their weapons were works of art as well as tools of war. Bronze helmets with crests, decorated shields showing mythological scenes, swords and spears with intricate designs, armor that protected the body while displaying the wealth and status of its wearer. An Etruscan warrior going into battle was a terrifying sight, a combination of Greek military discipline and native Italian ferocity. Their navy controlled the Tyrrhenian Sea, the stretch of Mediterranean between Italy and the islands of Corsica and Sardinia. Etruscan ships protected their trade routes and raided enemy commerce. The Greeks, always ready with a dramatic name, called the Etruscans pirates. But from the Etruscan perspective, they were simply defending their commercial interests and expanding their influence. They established colonies on Corsica and competed with Greek settlers for control of valuable harbors and resources. This competition would lead to conflict. In the waters off Alalia on Corsica, around the year 530 before the Common Era, Etruscan and Carthaginian ships together fought a massive naval battle against the Greeks. The battle was brutal and inconclusive. Both sides claimed victory. Both sides suffered heavy losses. The Greeks abandoned Corsica, but their fleet was so damaged they couldn't capitalize on their tactical success. The Etruscans and Carthaginians had demonstrated they could challenge Greek naval supremacy, at least in the western Mediterranean. But while Etruscan ships ruled the waves and Etruscan armies marched across Italy, a problem was developing that the Etruscans didn't fully appreciate. Their city-states remained independent, often competing with each other, never truly uniting under a single government. When external threats appeared, they could sometimes cooperate, but mostly, each city pursued its own interests. VI fought with its neighbor Rome over territory. Tarquinia and Cara struggled for commercial dominance. This independence was part of their identity, but it would prove to be a fatal weakness when they faced an enemy that valued unity above all else. The transformation of Etruscan civilization from scattered villages to dominant power had taken centuries. It happened gradually, generation by generation, as knowledge accumulated and wealth grew. Now they stood at the height of their power, their ships sailing every sea, their merchants trading in every port, their culture admired and imitated throughout Italy. They had created something magnificent. They had built cities that would last millennia. They had developed an art and culture that still moves us today. They had trained the people who would replace them. Everything was about to change. Second, Masters of Italy, the golden age of Etruscan culture and achievements. The 6th century before the Common Era marked the zenith of Etruscan power. From the Alps to Campania, from the Tyrrhenian coast to the Adriatic shores, Etruscan influence shaped the Italian peninsula. Their cities gleamed with temples whose painted terracotta roofs could be seen for miles. Their workshops produced art that would be treasured across the Mediterranean world. Their engineers accomplished feats that still impress modern experts. This was the golden age, when everything seemed possible and the future looked bright. Walk with me through the streets of Tarquinia at the height of its glory. The city crowns a plateau overlooking the coastal plain, its walls stretching for miles. Through the main gate, merchants drive carts loaded with goods from distant lands. Egyptian perfume bottles, Greek wine amphorae, Carthaginian textiles, metals from Spain. The market square buzzes with a dozen languages as traders haggle and bargain. Craftsmen display their work in open-fronted shops. Bronze workers hammer out helmets and mirrors. Potters shape clay on spinning wheels. Goldsmiths bend wire into intricate designs. The temple dominates the city center, massive and magnificent. Unlike Greek temples built entirely of stone, this structure combines a stone foundation with wooden columns and beams. But what it lacks in permanent materials, it makes up for in color and decoration. The roof blazes with painted terracotta sculptures. Gods and goddesses larger than life stand along the ridgeline. Monsters and heroes act out mythological scenes. Every surface carries bright paint in reds, blues, yellows, and blacks. When the sun strikes the temple, it glows like a jewel. Inside, priests perform the sacred rituals that maintain cosmic order. Incense smoke rises toward the ceiling. Worshippers bring offerings of food, wine, and precious objects. Musicians play during ceremonies, their melodies carefully prescribed by ancient tradition. The Etruscans believed that proper performance of rituals kept the gods satisfied and the universe in balance. Get the details wrong, fail to observe the correct procedures, and disaster might follow. Religion wasn't just belief. It was technology, a system for managing the relationship between humans and divine powers. Etruscan art during this golden age achieved a sophistication that amazed the ancient world. Their bronze workers created sculptures that combined technical mastery with emotional power. The Capitoline Wolf, probably Etruscan work from this period, shows a she-wolf with bared teeth feeding the legendary twins Romulus and Remus. The detail is extraordinary. Every hair in the wolf's coat is individually rendered. The muscles ripple beneath the skin. The expression captures both ferocity and maternal care. This wasn't just decoration. It was art that told stories and conveyed meaning. Their pottery evolved from simple imitations of Greek styles into something distinctly Etruscan. Bucchero ware, fired to a distinctive glossy black, became their signature ceramic. They shaped it into elaborate forms, decorating it with incised patterns and relief sculptures. Some Bucchero vessels reached enormous sizes, standing taller than a person, demonstrating not just artistic vision, but technical skill in controlling the firing process. These weren't utilitarian pots. They were statements of wealth and status, destined for temples, tombs, and the homes of the aristocracy. The painted tombs reached their artistic peak during this era. At Tarquinia, hundreds of underground chambers preserve scenes of Etruscan life with such vivid detail that we can almost hear the music and smell the feast. The Tomb of the Leopards shows a banquet in progress. Guests recline on couches, wine cups in hand. Servants move between them carrying food and drink. Musicians play double flutes and lyres. The colors remain bright after 2,500 years underground. Red, yellow, blue, green, black. The artists mix their pigments with such skill that the paint bonded permanently to the limestone walls. Another tomb shows hunting scenes with remarkable detail. Hunters on horseback pursue deer through a forest, rendered with careful attention to trees and landscape. Dogs run ahead, their bodies stretched in the chase. Birds fly overhead. The artist captured movement and energy, freezing a moment of action for eternity. These weren't naive paintings by primitive people. They were sophisticated works by trained artists who understood perspective, proportion, and composition. But what do these scenes tell us beyond their artistic merit? They reveal a society that valued pleasure, celebration, and the enjoyment of life. Etruscan banquets weren't just meals. They were social occasions where relationships were formed, business was conducted, and status was displayed. Men and women both attended, reclining together on couches in the Greek fashion. This shocked Greek and Roman observers who believed respectable women should eat separately from men if they appeared at banquets at all. The Etruscans saw things differently. Their women were partners, not property. Etruscan women appear throughout the art and inscriptions of this period, and their presence tells a revolutionary story. Unlike Greek women who were rarely named in public inscriptions, Etruscan women had their names carved on monuments and artwork. Unlike Roman women who were legally under the control of fathers or husbands, Etruscan women owned property and conducted business. Inscriptions identify women by their own family names, not just as daughters or wives of men. Some served as priestesses, performing sacred rituals and maintaining temples. The famous sarcophagus from Cerveteri shows us what this looked like in practice. A married couple reclines together on the lid, carved in terracotta and painted in bright colors. The husband and wife face each other as equals, their poses relaxed and intimate. Her hand rests on his shoulder. His arm reaches toward her. They smile slightly, as if sharing a private joke. This wasn't how Greek or Roman art typically portrayed married couples. This was something different, a partnership that honored both parties. Can you imagine the scandal this caused among their neighbors? Greek writers complained that Etruscan women attended dinner parties and drank wine in public. Roman moralists used Etruscan gender equality as proof of their moral corruption. But the Etruscans didn't care what others thought. They built their society according to their own values, and those values included respect for women that wouldn't be seen again in Europe for many centuries. The engineering achievements of this golden age still inspire wonder today. The Etruscans didn't just build cities. They transformed the landscape to serve their needs. In the marshlands and floodplains, they constructed elaborate drainage systems that turned swamps into farmland. Near Veii, they carved a massive tunnel through solid rock to divert a river, draining the land for agriculture. The tunnel stretched over a mile, maintaining a perfect gradient to ensure water flowed properly. Modern engineers examining this ancient work shake their heads in amazement at the precision achieved with bronze tools and human labor. Their roads connected cities and facilitated trade across the mountainous Italian terrain. Unlike the later Roman roads built by armies for military purposes, Etruscan roads primarily served commerce. They carved highways through rock, built bridges across rivers, and created a network that linked the Etruscan world together. When the Romans later built their famous road system, they often followed routes the Etruscans had pioneered centuries earlier. The Etruscans also mastered architecture in ways that influenced all subsequent building in Italy. They developed the arch, that elegant structural element that would become the signature of Roman architecture. By placing wedge-shaped stones in a curved arrangement, they could span greater distances than simple post and lintel construction allowed. Arches appeared in their city gates, their bridges, their drainage tunnels. The Romans would later claim the arch as their own innovation, but they learned the technique from Etruscan builders. Their temples followed a distinctive plan that differed from Greek temples. While Greeks built temples with columns on all four sides, Etruscan temples typically had columns only in front, with the back portion enclosed by walls. They divided the interior into 3 chambers for different gods, reflecting their preference for divine triads. This 3-part design would later appear in Roman temples, including the Great Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill in Rome. The Etruscans were literally teaching Rome how to build its most sacred structures. Music filled Etruscan life with a richness that impressed all who heard it. They played double flutes, called aloi, creating harmonies and melodies that accompanied every important activity. Musicians performed at religious ceremonies, funerals, banquets, and even during boxing matches and athletic competitions. The tomb paintings show us these musicians, their cheeks puffed as they blow into their instruments, their fingers moving across the holes to create different notes. Some evidence suggests they used music in ways that seem strange to us, playing specific melodies to accompany specific activities like baking bread or whipping slaves. Music wasn't just entertainment. It was part of the cosmic order. Athletic games held deep religious and social significance for the Etruscans. They organized elaborate competitions to honor the dead, believing that athletic contests pleased the spirits of the deceased. Runners raced across painted courses. Wrestlers grappled in the dust. Boxers traded blows with leather-wrapped fists. Jumpers leaped while holding weights to increase their distance. These weren't casual activities. They were sacred performances that connected the living to the dead and the mortal to the divine. Some of their games were brutal by modern standards. Tomb paintings show a sport called the fursu game, named after the masked figure who appears in the scenes. A man with a club fights a dog, while a masked figure controls the action. Sometimes the paintings show what appears to be gladiatorial combat, with armed men fighting to the death. The Romans would later develop these brutal entertainments into the famous gladiatorial games, but the seeds were planted in Etruscan funeral rituals. The wealth flowing into Etruscan cities during this golden age was staggering. Gold from trade filled aristocratic treasuries. Slaves from warfare provided labor for workshops and fields. Tribute from subject peoples swelled city coffers. The elite competed to display their wealth through elaborate tombs, rich offerings to the gods, and lavish personal possessions. The Regolini Galassi tomb at Cerveteri, discovered in the 19th century, contained gold jewelry of such quality that it stunned archaeologists. Fibulae with intricate granulation work. Bracelets decorated with rows of tiny gold spheres. Necklaces strung with hundreds of carefully crafted beads. This wasn't just wealth. It was art raised to the highest level. But this golden age contained the seeds of its own decline. The Etruscan cities remained independent, each pursuing its own interests, never truly uniting. When enemies appeared, they struggled to coordinate their response. Internal rivalries prevented the formation of a unified defense. The aristocrats who ruled the cities grew increasingly isolated from the common people, creating social tensions that would later explode into revolution. Meanwhile, to the southeast, Rome was growing. The small town on 7 hills was transforming into a real city, and it was learning everything from its Etruscan neighbors. Etruscan kings ruled Rome during much of this period, bringing with them Etruscan building techniques, religious practices, and governmental structures. They drained the Roman Forum using Etruscan engineering. They built the first Roman temple using Etruscan architectural principles. They taught the Romans how to organize an army, how to conduct religious ceremonies, how to build in stone rather than mud and wood. The Romans were excellent students. They absorbed every lesson. They copied every technique. They adopted Etruscan customs as their own. The fasces, that bundle of rods with an axe that symbolized Roman authority, came from the Etruscans. The toga, the formal garment of Roman citizenship, came from the Etruscans. The triumph, the military parade that celebrated victories, came from the Etruscans. Even the name Roma itself might have Etruscan origins. The Romans were building their civilization on an Etruscan foundation. What would happen when the student decided it no longer needed the teacher? When Roman ambition collided with Etruscan pride? When the pupil surpassed the master and turned hungry eyes toward the lands that had taught it everything, the golden age was reaching its end. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. The next chapter of Etruscan history would be written in blood and fire as Rome rose to replace its teachers. The Etruscans, at the height of their power, couldn't have imagined what was coming. Their cities were strong. Their culture was sophisticated. Their influence stretched across Italy. They had survived for centuries, adapting to challenges and absorbing influences from across the Mediterranean. They thought they would endure forever. But history had other plans. The greatest threat to Etruscan civilization wasn't coming from foreign invaders or barbarian hordes. It was growing in their own backyard, learning their lessons too well, preparing to take everything they had built and claim it as its own. Third, the Roman shadow, how Rome learned, copied, and eventually destroyed its teachers. The year is 509 before the Common Era. In Rome, something dramatic is happening. The last Etruscan king, Tarquinius Superbus, is being driven from the city in disgrace. Roman aristocrats have had enough of monarchical rule. They establish a republic, swearing never again to bow before kings. The Etruscans had taught Rome how to govern, how to build, how to worship the gods. Now Rome was throwing off its teachers and declaring independence. This wasn't just a political revolution. It was the beginning of the end for Etruscan dominance in Italy. The story the Romans told about this revolution became legendary. King Tarquin's son had assaulted a noble Roman woman named Lucretia. Unable to bear the shame, she took her own life after revealing the crime to her husband and father. The outraged Roman aristocrats rose in rebellion, expelling the entire Tarquinian family and abolishing the monarchy forever. Whether this story is literally true matters less than what it reveals about Roman attitudes. They were ready to stand on their own, to reject Etruscan authority, to forge their own path. The expelled king didn't give up easily. He sought help from Lars Porsena, the powerful king of the Etruscan city of Clusium. Porsena marched on Rome with a formidable army, determined to restore Tarquin to his throne. What happened next depends on which version of the story you believe. Roman historians claimed that brave Roman defenders held the city against overwhelming odds, performing acts of legendary courage. Etruscan and Greek sources suggest Porsena actually captured Rome and imposed harsh terms. The truth probably lies somewhere between these extremes. What matters is the aftermath. Even if Porsena briefly controlled Rome, he didn't restore the Tarquinian monarchy. The Roman Republic survived, and Rome began its long climb to power, using everything the Etruscans had taught it. The irony is almost painful to contemplate. The Etruscans had educated their future conquerors so well that Rome could now stand against them. The 5th century before the Common Era saw the beginning of Etruscan decline. Their naval power was broken in a massive sea battle off Cumae in 474. A combined fleet of Etruscan and Carthaginian ships attacked the Greek city, hoping to expand Etruscan influence in southern Italy. The Greeks, led by the tyrant Hiero of Syracuse, inflicted a crushing defeat. The Etruscan fleet was destroyed. Their dream of controlling the southern seas died with their ships. Never again would Etruscan vessels dominate the Mediterranean. On land, problems multiplied just as quickly. Celtic tribes began pouring over the Alps from the north, seeking land and plunder. These fierce warriors brought a different style of warfare to Italy. They fought as individuals rather than in organized formations, relying on size, strength, and ferocity. The Etruscans, accustomed to the disciplined phalanx style of combat, struggled against these unpredictable enemies. City after city in the Po Valley fell to Celtic invasion. The northern Etruscan settlements were lost. The Confederation was shrinking. Meanwhile, in central Italy, Rome was growing stronger with each passing year. The Romans fought constant wars against their neighbors, slowly expanding their territory. They developed a military system more flexible than the rigid Etruscan phalanx. Their manipular legion could adapt to different terrain and different enemies. They learned from every defeat and perfected their craft through endless practice. War was becoming Rome's profession, and the Romans were very good at their job. The city of Veii stood less than 10 miles from Rome, close enough that the two cities had been rivals for generations. They fought over territory, over trade routes, over prestige. But now Rome was ready to end the rivalry permanently. In 406 before the Common Era, the Romans began a siege of Veii that would last 10 years. Think about that. 10 years of continuous siege, soldiers growing old in the trenches, children born during the siege reaching adolescence before it ended, generations of hatred hardening into stone. The siege became legendary in Roman memory, deliberately compared to the Greek siege of Troy. Roman soldiers built permanent camps around Veii, the first time a Roman army stayed in the field year-round. They built siege works and dug tunnels. They starved the city, cutting off all supplies. Finally, according to Roman legend, they broke through by digging a tunnel that emerged inside Veii's temple. While Etruscan priests performed sacred rituals, Roman soldiers burst from the tunnel and opened the gates. The city fell in 396 before the Common Era. What happened next shocked the ancient world. The Romans didn't just conquer Veii, they destroyed it completely. They massacred the population or sold them into slavery. They tore down the buildings. They plowed salt into the fields so nothing would grow. They erased Veii from the map so thoroughly that later generations argued about where it had stood. This wasn't normal ancient warfare, where conquered cities paid tribute but continued to exist. This was annihilation. Rome was sending a message to every Etruscan city: submit or die. Can you imagine the terror this inspired? For the first time, the Etruscan cities faced an enemy that didn't want tribute or alliance. Rome wanted their land, their resources, their very existence. The rules of Italian warfare had changed, and the Etruscans didn't know how to respond. Their confederation structure, which had served them for centuries, now became a fatal weakness. Each city worried about its own survival. None would commit fully to helping the others. United, they might have stopped Rome. Divided, they fell one by one. The Etruscan city of Volsini tried desperately to reform its government and society to meet the Roman threat. The aristocracy had ruled for centuries, growing wealthy while the common people struggled. Now internal tensions exploded into revolution. The common people rose up, demanding political rights and social equality. They overthrew the old aristocratic families and established a more democratic government. For a moment, it seemed like Volsini might revitalize itself through reform. But the overthrown aristocrats didn't accept defeat. They fled to Rome and begged for help against the revolutionaries who had expelled them. The Romans, always nervous about popular uprisings, agreed eagerly. In 264 before the Common Era, a Roman army marched on Volsini. They crushed the popular government, destroyed the city, and relocated the surviving population to a new site under Roman control. The aristocrats got their city back, but as a Roman client state stripped of independence. This pattern would repeat across Etruria. aristocrats betraying their own cities to preserve their personal power, Rome turning internal conflicts to its advantage. The final independent Etruscan cities fell during the social war of the early 1st century before the Common Era. By this time, the Etruscans were already so Romanized that distinguishing them from Romans was difficult. They spoke Latin in public, though Etruscan might still be heard in private homes. They worshipped Roman gods, though old Etruscan deities lingered in local cults. They served in Roman armies, fought Roman wars, and died for Roman ambitions. When the social war erupted, a last desperate attempt by Italian peoples to win Roman citizenship, the remaining Etruscan cities chose Rome's side. They had learned that resistance meant destruction. Cooperation offered survival, even if it meant abandoning their identity. Rome granted citizenship to its Italian allies, including the Etruscans. On paper, this was a victory. Etruscans could now vote in Roman assemblies, hold Roman offices, and claim all the rights of Roman citizens. In reality, it was the final absorption. Within a generation or two, Etruscan identity began to fade. The language died out as everyone spoke Latin. The old aristocratic families intermarried with Romans until the bloodlines blurred beyond distinction. The sacred books and religious traditions were translated into Latin and integrated into Roman practice, losing their specifically Etruscan character. Yet even as Etruscan political independence vanished, Etruscan influence saturated Roman culture. The Romans performed augury, reading the flight of birds to divine the future, using techniques learned from Etruscan priests. Roman generals consulted Etruscan haruspices before major battles, examining animal livers for signs of divine favor. The Roman triumph, that spectacular parade celebrating military victories, followed Etruscan precedents exactly. The triumphant general rode in a chariot, wearing a purple toga and golden crown, his face painted red to resemble Jupiter himself. Every detail came from Etruscan ritual. Roman architecture was fundamentally Etruscan. The arch, the vault, the technique of building with concrete, all learned from Etruscan engineers. The layout of Roman temples, with columns in front and enclosed chambers behind, Etruscan design. The grid pattern of Roman city planning, with straight streets intersecting at right angles. Etruscan urban planning. Even the Roman house, with its central atrium open to the sky, descended from Etruscan domestic architecture. Rome built an empire using Etruscan blueprints. The alphabet the Romans used to write Latin, the same alphabet that eventually became the English alphabet you are reading right now, came to them through the Etruscans. The Etruscans had adapted the Greek alphabet to write their own language, modifying certain letters to represent sounds that didn't exist in Greek. The Romans learned this adapted alphabet and modified it further for Latin. Every time you write a letter, you are using a system that passed through Etruscan hands on its journey from Greece to Rome to the modern world. Roman religion was thoroughly mixed with Etruscan elements. The Romans adopted the Etruscan practice of dividing the sky into regions, each associated with different gods. They used Etruscan techniques for interpreting lightning strikes. They believed that certain phenomena, like the birth of deformed animals or unusual weather events, carried divine messages that Etruscan-trained priests could decode. The very idea that the universe spoke to humans through signs, that religious specialists could read these signs and advise on proper action. This fundamentally Etruscan worldview became central to Roman religion. Even Roman gladiatorial games, those brutal spectacles that entertained millions across the empire, had Etruscan roots. The custom of staging combat at funerals to honor the dead began in Etruria. The Romans adopted this practice and transformed it into mass entertainment, building enormous amphitheaters and training professional fighters. But the seed was Etruscan, planted in funeral rituals centuries before Rome became powerful. The Roman calendar itself bore Etruscan influence. The names of months, the organization of days, the religious festivals that marked the year, all showed signs of Etruscan origin. When Julius Caesar reformed the calendar in the 1st century before the Common Era, creating the Julian calendar that would eventually evolve into our modern Gregorian calendar, he was modifying a system that had deep Etruscan roots. What happened to the Etruscan language? It slowly died, replaced by Latin in public life and eventually even in private. The last native speakers probably lived in the 1st century of the Common Era, perhaps a few scattered communities in remote areas where old traditions lingered longest. The sacred books, those texts that contained centuries of religious wisdom and ritual knowledge, were translated into Latin and then forgotten in their original form. By the 2nd century, almost no one could read Etruscan anymore. The Emperor Claudius, who ruled Rome in the 1st century of the Common Era, was one of the last Romans who seriously studied Etruscan culture. He wrote a 20-volume history of the Etruscans, now lost to us. He could read the language. He understood their religious practices. He recognized that something important had been lost. But even Claudius couldn't stop the tide of history. The Etruscan world was fading into legend, remembered in fragments and footnotes, its glory days already ancient history. The great Etruscan cities stood empty or were rebuilt as Roman towns. Tarquinia declined into a small settlement. Volcae was abandoned. Veii remained a ruin, its destruction so complete that only archaeology could prove it had existed. The painted tombs survived underground, sealed chambers preserving images of a vanished world. The bronze sculptures endured, scattered across Italy, and carried to distant lands as loot or trade goods. The engineering works remained functional, their Roman users not even realizing they walked through tunnels carved by Etruscan hands centuries earlier. Modern archaeology has recovered much of what was lost. Excavations at Etruscan sites have revealed cities, temples, tombs, and artifacts. The painted tombs have been carefully documented and preserved. Museums display Etruscan art that astounds visitors with its beauty and sophistication. Scholars work to decipher inscriptions, adding slowly to our understanding of the language. DNA studies have revealed genetic connections between modern Tuscans and ancient Etruscan remains, suggesting biological continuity even as cultural identity disappeared. But something profound was lost that can never be fully recovered. An entire civilization with its own worldview, its own values, its own way of understanding the universe. The Etruscans saw the world differently than Greeks or Romans. They valued women in ways that wouldn't reappear in Europe for millennia. They approached religion as a science of signs and symbols. They created art that combined technical mastery with emotional depth. They built a culture that influenced everyone around them. And then they vanished, absorbed so completely by Rome that many people today have never heard of them. The final irony is this: Rome conquered the Etruscans militarily, destroyed their cities, and erased their political independence. But culturally, the Etruscans conquered Rome. Every Roman temple built on Etruscan principles was an Etruscan victory. Every Roman augur reading the flight of birds continued Etruscan traditions. Every Roman arch standing across the empire testified to Etruscan engineering. Rome ruled the world, but it did so using tools the Etruscans had forged. The student destroyed the teacher, but carried the lessons forever. And so today, we discovered that the Etruscans were not just another ancient civilization lost to time. They were the masters who taught Rome everything. Their engineering still functions beneath our feet. Their alphabet forms the letters we write today. Their religious practices echoed through Roman temples for centuries. Yet history nearly forgot them entirely. Personally, I believe the Etruscans achieved something remarkable by influencing Rome so deeply that their legacy survived even after their civilization died. What do you think? Which aspect of Etruscan culture impresses you most? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Pages from History. Turn on notifications so you never miss another epic documentary. Thank you for watching. See you in the next chapter of history.